The chisel caught on something that was not wood. He had been working along the interior wall for the better part of the morning, pulling out the damaged planking where the winter damp had crept in and softened the grain. October light came through the single west-facing window in a low, flat angle, the kind that showed every imperfection in a surface. He worked slowly. He was 65 years old and his hands still knew their business, but they no longer hurried. The cabin sat in a narrow grass valley at the edge of the Bitterroot Range, elevation high enough that the aspens had already turned and dropped. The creek outside ran quiet this time of year, its voice smaller than it was in June. From the eastern wall, where the rock shelf met the foundation logs, you could hear nothing but that water, and occasionally the wind moving down from the ridgeline. He had built this place himself. 1883. 22 days of work and one bad fever at the end of it that had laid him out for 3 weeks in the settlement below. He remembered the building of it in the way you remember a thing you did alone, not as a sequence of events but as a series of physical sensations. The smell of cut pine, the weight of a roof beam, the particular silence of a valley that has not had a human structure in it before. The chisel caught, and he stopped. He worked the blade sideways, careful. Whatever was lodged in the gap had some stiffness to it still, not rotted through. He set the chisel down and worked his fingers into the space and felt paper, folded twice. He drew it out slowly, the way you draw a splinter, with attention. It was the size of a man's palm when folded, browned at the edges, softened at the creases. He did not open it. He stood holding it for a moment, the morning light falling across his hand, and then he set it on the workbench at the center of the room. Not at the edge, at the center, where he would not forget it and where it would not fall. Then he went to the wash basin by the door and poured water from the pitcher and worked the sawdust from his knuckles with the small brush his wife kept on the shelf. He did this without hurry. Outside, a horse shifted its weight somewhere near the fence line. The creek ran. He dried his hands on the cloth hung at the basin's side and stood for a moment with the cloth in his hands, looking at the paper on the workbench. 31 years he had lived in this valley. He had built the cabin, run the fence line, cleared the south slope for hay. He knew every wall of this structure the way a man knows his own handwriting. He had not known about the paper. He went back to the workbench and sat down on the stool. Not yet. He set the cloth down on the basin's edge and let the memory come. November 14th, 1871. He was 34 years old and had been on the road since mid-morning. The wagon carried planed boards, a box of cut nails, and a canvas roll of hand tools belonging to a man in the next settlement who had hired him to frame a storefront before the cold made the ground too hard to work. The job was plain, and the pay was fair, and he had not thought much beyond that when he left Dillard. He found the dry creek bed at Sutter's Fork around 4 in the afternoon, when the light had already gone low and yellow, and the temperature was dropping faster than the sky gave any sign of. He unhitched the mule and tied her at a run of scrub pine where she could stand out of the wind. He gathered wood from the creek bank, dry cottonwood, which burned fast, and a good section of fallen pine that would hold through the night. He built the fire the way he always built it, small platform of kindling, larger pieces at an angle, nothing wasted. He ate salt pork and hardtack sitting close to the heat, and did not think about much. The country out there was open in every direction, the kind of flat that makes a man feel the size of the sky without meaning to. No moon yet, stars already hard and cold overhead. He pulled his bedroll from under the wagon seat and spread it close to the fire, and lay on his back with his arms at his sides, and listened to the mule shift her weight, and the fire settle, and the far-off sound of something moving through dry grass that was probably nothing. He was nearly asleep when he heard the footsteps. Not the mule, not the wind. Something deliberate moving out of the dark from the north, coming toward the fire at a pace that suggested a man who had decided to approach and was no longer debating it. He lay still for one breath, two. Then he sat up without hurrying, and put his hand on the long handle of the hatchet that he kept beside the bedroll, not out of fear, but out of habit, the way a man keeps a door latched, not expecting trouble, only not being careless. He did not move the hatchet. He left his hand on it and looked north into the dark where the firelight ran out. A figure came into the edge of the light. A man, on foot. No horse behind him, no pack, no bedroll visible at his shoulder. His coat was wrong for the weather, thin across the shoulders, city-made, and he was moving with the particular careful deliberateness of someone who had been walking longer than they had expected to be walking. He stopped at the outer reach of the fire's warmth and looked at the man on the ground. Neither of them spoke. The man at the edge of the light did not move. He stood where the warmth reached him, and no farther. The way an animal will stop at a threshold it has learned not to trust. His hands were at his sides, empty. The coat was buttoned wrong at the collar, one side riding higher than the other, the kind of crooked that happens when a man dresses in the dark and does not correct it afterward, because there is no one to correct it for. His face was hollowed at the cheeks, not from some natural leanness, but from the specific excavation of 2 days without food. The carpenter had seen that look before, on men after a hard crossing, on men who had buried something and not eaten since. He could see the man was not armed in any way that mattered, or if he was, it was nothing he could reach before the carpenter could stand. He looked at him for a moment longer. Then he turned back to the fire. The pan had cooled at the edge of the stones where he had moved it earlier. He picked it up by the handle and set it back over the heat. He did not look up when he did it. He did not gesture toward the other side of the fire. He did not say, "Sit," or "There's enough," or any of the things a man might say to make the offering into a statement of himself. He simply moved the pan back onto the heat, and the salt pork in it began again to spit. That was all. The man at the edge of the light watched this happen. Something in his shoulders changed. Not a relaxing, exactly, but a settling, the way a structure under long pressure adjusts when one beam is relieved of a portion of the load. He came forward 3 steps and lowered himself to the ground on the far side of the fire, moving carefully, the way a man moves when he is not entirely sure his legs will finish what they started. He sat with his knees drawn up and his arms resting across them, and looked into the fire. The carpenter turned the pork once with a stick. Wind came across the creek bed from the west, bending the flame briefly sideways, and then the night was still again. Neither of them spoke. The carpenter had hardtack in the saddlebag behind him, 3 pieces wrapped in cloth. He reached back without looking and found them by touch, and set 2 on the flat of a stone near the man's side of the fire. He kept one for himself. The man looked at them for a moment, then picked one up and began to eat it slowly, the way you eat when you are trying not to appear desperate, and the desperation shows anyway. The mule shifted in the dark. The fire settled. The carpenter ate and said nothing, and the stranger ate, and the night moved around them both. The salt pork finished and the fire burned lower, and neither of them moved to add wood. The stranger's breathing had steadied. He had stopped holding his chest quite so carefully. The cold was still there. It would be there until April, in this country. But he had the fire's edge now, and that was enough. His boots were wrong for the weather. Thin-soled, made for a town, not for 2 days on open ground. The carpenter looked at them once, and did not look again. An hour passed. Maybe 2. The creek bed was silent except for the fire, and the occasional sound of the mule settling her weight. The stranger spoke once. He said he had come from Harlow Crossing. He said he could not go back. That was all. He did not offer more, and the carpenter did not reach for it. He simply turned his head slightly, the way a man does when he is acknowledging that he heard, and then looked back at the fire. In this part of the territory, in this decade, a man who had come from somewhere and could not go back was not a rare thing. The war had loosened people from their places. The railroads had done the rest. You met men all the time who were somewhere other than where they had started, and most of them were not going to tell you the distance. The carpenter added one piece of wood to the fire. The night moved. Stars crossed above the rim of the creek bed. Somewhere to the north, a coyote spoke and was not answered. Just before the sky began to change, that flat gray that comes before color, before you can call it dawn but can tell the darkness is losing its confidence, the stranger reached inside his coat. He took out a small leather notebook, the kind a merchant might use for accounts. He tore one page from it, not hastily, deliberately, running his thumb along the seam first. He drew without speaking. The carpenter watched him work. The map took perhaps 4 minutes. A valley, a creek, a rock shelf on the eastern wall, a trail from the northeast. At the bottom of the page he wrote one line, pressing the pencil with the care of a man who wanted the letters to last. Then he folded the page once and set it on the flat stone where the hardtack had been. He stood, and the standing cost him, and he did not show that it cost him except in the 2 seconds he took before he moved. He looked at the carpenter once, not with gratitude and not without it, something that had no clean name. Then he walked north, into the gray, and the gray took him. The carpenter sat with the fire until it was fully light. He did not touch the paper on the stone for a long while. When he finally picked it up, he read the line once, then folded it again. The paper had been inside the wall for 19 years. He did not know that yet, standing at the workbench in the early morning of late October 1902, with the plaster dust still on his hands and the smell of old wood rising from the gap he had opened. He knew only that the folded page was there, wedged between the inner beam and the stone of the eastern wall, exactly where the chinking had cracked and let the cold through. He set it on the workbench. He did not open it immediately. He brushed the dust from his hands against his trousers and stood looking at it, the way a man looks at something he recognizes before he can say from where. The fold was soft. The paper had taken on the color of the wood around it. Not yellow exactly, more the color of a thing that has been held in darkness long enough to become part of it. He unfolded it. The map was still clear. 31 years had not taken the lines from it. The valley, long and narrow on the page, the creek running north to south, marked in 2 short parallel strokes. The rock shelf on the eastern wall, indicated by a series of small horizontal marks, the kind a careful man makes when he wants to distinguish stone from earth. The trail coming in from the northeast. He had looked at this map enough times, in the 11 years he had carried it, that his eye moved over it now the way a man moves through a room he grew up in, without surprise, without effort. Then his eye reached the bottom of the page. No one has filed. It is yours if you go. He stood very still. He had not read those words in 19 years. He had thought he remembered them exactly, had assembled them from memory more times than he could count, in the first years, in the years of building, in the years after. But memory had worn them smooth, the way a thumb wears a coin. What was on the page now was not the memory. It was the original, the pencil pressed with care by a man who wanted the letters to last. He heard her step in the kitchen, the particular weight and rhythm of it, the way she moved through that room, which he had learned so thoroughly that he could have told her where she was standing without seeing. The step paused. She appeared in the doorway. She saw his stillness, the set of his shoulders, his hands flat on the workbench, and she did not ask. She looked at him for a moment in the way she had, reading what was there without naming it. Then she went back to the kitchen. The sound of her resumed, quiet and even. He folded the map. Then he unfolded it. The line was still there. The pencil had lasted, as the man had intended. He looked at the handwriting for a long time. He had carried it in his left boot, not the right, the left. He had decided this the morning after the fire, crouching at Sutter's Fork with the paper flat on his knee and the cold coming off the creek bed like it meant something. He folded it twice, then a third time, into a square no wider than 3 fingers, and tucked it between the leather and the insole, where it would lie flat against his arch. He could feel it there for the first several weeks. Then he stopped feeling it. By spring, it was simply part of his foot. He carried it through Dellard, through a settlement north of the Clark Fork called Prentice, where he worked a mill job for 14 months, through a winter in a place that is no longer on any map, where the snow came in October and stayed until April, and the only work was splitting wood and watching the sky. He put the boot on every morning and took it off every night, and did not think about what was in it, the way you do not think about something you cannot afford to think about. He was 37 when the fever found him. He did not know where he was, exactly, when it started. A boarding house in a town called Alder Creek, a room at the end of a narrow hall with one window that faced a wall. The fever came on fast, the way fevers do in that country in November, and for 3 days he was not entirely in the world. He remembered heat, he remembered the ceiling, he remembered thinking, with great clarity, that he was going to die in that room, and that no one would know where to look for him. On the second night, he believed it was the second night, he got up. He did not remember deciding to. He was standing at the wall with the plaster cold under his palms, and then he was pressing the folded paper into a gap at the baseboard where the plaster had pulled away, and then he was back on the bed. He recovered. It took another week. When he was well enough to stand, he looked for the map. He went along the baseboard on his hands and knees, running his fingers into every gap. He pulled back the cot. He checked the sill, the door frame, the space behind the washstand. He found nothing. He sat on the edge of the cot for a long time. He told himself it was gone. He lived the next 6 years as a man without a map, working, moving, not thinking about a valley he had never seen. He filed it under things that had not been meant for him. He thought the stranger had misjudged him, or misjudged something, and the world had corrected the error in its usual way. He had been wrong about what happened in that room, but he would not know that for many years yet. He found it 6 years later in the boot's inner seam. He had worn the boots so long the leather had softened along the instep, and the inner lining had begun to separate. He was sitting on a step outside a livery in a town called Greer, pulling at a loose thread, when his finger caught the edge of something stiff. He worked it free slowly. The paper had been folded so long the creases were almost cuts. He opened it on his knee. The valley was still there, the creek running north-south, the rock shelf on the eastern wall, the single line at the bottom in the stranger's careful hand. He was 46 years old. He had no wife, no permanent address, no job that was not someone else's job first. He had been filling in the shapes of other men's lives for 22 years, their floors, their door frames, their shelves, and he had none of his own. He filed on the claim in April of 1883. The land office in Dellard took his money without ceremony, stamped the paper twice, and slid it across the counter. The clerk did not look up. The carpenter folded the document into his coat and walked out into a morning that looked exactly like every other morning, which was how he preferred the large things to arrive. He reached the valley on the 12th day out of Dellard. He came down through a notch in the ridge, and the valley opened below him, narrow and green, with the creek catching the late afternoon light, and the eastern wall rising clean and gray above the tree line. The rock shelf was exactly where the map said it would be. He stood at the edge of the notch for a long time. He was not a man who marked occasions, but he stood there longer than he needed to. He spent that summer alone. He quarried the foundation stones from the shelf itself, which was flat enough to work with a cold chisel and patience. He felled timber from the northern slope. He squared the logs by hand, cut the notches, fitted the sills. The work was slow in the way that good work is slow, not from difficulty but from the attention it required. He did not rush it. He was not going anywhere. By September, the cabin had 4 walls and a roof. By October, the interior was planked. The last board went up on a gray afternoon, with the first cold pressing down from the high country, and when it was seated and nailed, he stood back and looked at it. He looked at the walls. The plaster would come later. For now it was just bare wood, the seams visible, the gaps at the boards still open. He took the map from his breast pocket. He had carried it there since Greer. He folded it one more time and pressed it into the gap at the base of the last plank, where the wall met the floor and the fit was not quite tight. It was a private thing. He told no one. He was not sure himself why he did it, except that the map had led him here, and here was where it should stay. That winter passed, the way most winters do in a valley that narrow, quickly in memory, slowly in the living. The snow came early and stayed. He worked on smaller things, a door frame, a shelf, the iron latch on the single window. The creek froze by December and did not move again until March. He watched it from the step most mornings, drinking coffee that had gone cold before he remembered it. He was 65 years old in October 1902, and his hands showed it. The knuckles had thickened. The scar along his left palm, from a chisel that had slipped in his 20s, was white now against the rest of the skin. He still did good work. He simply did it more slowly, and with a care that had less to do with patience than with knowing how little time remained to correct a mistake. The interior wall had shifted sometime in the previous winter. He'd noticed it in August, a slight buckle in the base plank where the sill had settled unevenly. The wood dried past what the original fit could hold. A small thing, something he would have left in another man's house. He didn't leave it in his own. He pulled the plank. The map was still there, pressed flat against the sill, folded into quarters. The paper had gone soft at the creases, not fragile, but yielding, the way paper goes when it has been handled many times, and then held very still for a long while. He unfolded it. The lines were faint. The creek was still there, and the rock shelf, and the valley's narrow shape sketched in a few certain strokes. The handwriting at the bottom was still legible. No one has filed. It is yours if you go. He stood at the wall with it in his hands and did not move for some time. She came to the doorway. She had been making bread. There was flour on her hands, a pale dusting along her forearms. She looked at him first, then at the paper. She had been with him long enough to read the quality of his stillness, and this stillness was different. Not trouble, not grief, something older than either. He held it out without speaking. She crossed the room. She took the paper by the edge, the way you take something that has been a long time in one place, and she looked at it, the sketched lines, the creek she had walked every morning for 5 years before he arrived, the rock shelf that held the eastern wall of the house she was standing in, then the line at the bottom. Her chin dropped. Once. She looked at the ceiling. Her hands were still. The flour had left faint marks on the edge of the paper where she held it. She did not look at him. She was somewhere else, not far, but somewhere he could not follow yet. She stood there, holding it. She was still holding the paper. He watched her the way he had learned to watch her, not searching her face, just present, giving her whatever time the moment asked for. The flour on her hands had dried. A faint white outline remained where her fingers gripped the edge. She had arrived at the valley in late April of 1897, alone. She had come by wagon from Bitterroot Junction with 2 trunks, a cast-iron skillet, and a ledger she used to track what she spent and what she owed herself. She was 22 years old. She had ridden out from the land office with a copy of her own filing, the ink still faintly damp, and she had not told anyone where she was going because there was no one left to tell. The cabin was standing when she found it, but only just. The roof had shed 2 of its boards on the north side. The door hung open on one hinge, and something, a marmot, possibly more than one, had made use of the interior over however many winters it had sat empty. The creek was where she had been told it would be, running north to south along the western edge of the claim. cold and clear and indifferent to everything that had or hadn't happened here. She spent the first 3 days on the roof. By June, she had patched the walls, rehung the door, and planted a kitchen garden in the thin soil east of the creek. The rock shelf on the eastern wall held the cabin steady against the hillside. Whoever had set that foundation had known what they were doing. She noticed that early and thought nothing more of it. She did not think about her father often. She had learned not to. He had been gone since she was 9, gone in the way that has no grave to visit, no letter to explain it, just an absence that arrived one autumn and never resolved into anything she could name. Her mother had not spoken of it. By the time her mother died, the silence had become its own kind of answer, and she had accepted it the way you accept weather. She filed the claim under her own name. She paid her taxes in Bitterroot Junction each spring. She broke 2 wagon axles and 1 ox, and rebuilt her fence line after the second winter's snowpack took a section of it down. She did not ask for help from the families at the next claim, though she nodded to them at the junction, and they nodded back. She was not hiding. She had simply arrived somewhere that did not require her to explain herself, and she had stayed. The valley had been empty when she found it. She had assumed it always had been. She had not meant to say it. He was still holding the map, turned at an angle toward the window where the light was better. The tier along the top edge was clean in some places and ragged in others, the way a page goes when it is pulled quickly from a binding that has been softened by use. She had been watching the tier without meaning to. Then she said it. That her father had carried a small notebook, leather, she thought, dark brown or black. She couldn't be certain anymore. That he used to sit at the kitchen table in the evenings and draw in it. Maps sometimes. Diagrams of things she didn't understand. She remembered the scratch of the pencil and the way he held the book flat with one hand while he worked. She had not told him this before. She had not told anyone. He set the map on the table between them and looked at the torn edge. She looked at it too. The paper was the color of old cream, and the tier ran unevenly across the top, shorter on the left, longer on the right, with one small tab that had folded back on itself at some point and never fully flattened out. The kind of tier a page makes when it is taken in a hurry, or in the dark, or both. He did not say anything. She did not say anything. The window behind him was gray with late October light, the flat, diffuse kind that arrives in the last week of the month and does not change much from morning to afternoon. It made everything in the room look like something remembered rather than something present. She thought about her father's hands. She had not thought about his hands in years. He had been careful with things, tools, animals, the edges of furniture. She remembered that. She remembered the way he checked a door's fit before he closed it, the way he ran a thumb along a seam. She had assumed it was habit. Now she thought it might have been something else, a way of tending to what was in front of him because he could not tend to what was behind. She smoothed the edge of the map with her fingernail, just once, at the corner where the paper had gone soft from folding. He watched her do it. Neither of them named what they were sitting across from. It was too large to name and too fragile, and they had both learned, in different years and for different reasons, that some things survive better in silence than in speech. The candle on the shelf had not been lit yet. The gray light was enough for now. He set his hands flat on the table. He did not look at the map when he began. He looked at a point somewhere between them, the grain of the wood, or nothing at all. He told her about the night at Sutter's Fork, the way a man describes a stretch of road he has traveled once and not forgotten. The dry creek bed, the cold that had come in hard from the north that afternoon. He had made camp early because the sky said to. He had a fire going, and the pan was on, when he heard the footsteps. Not careful footsteps, just exhausted ones. A man who had run out of the energy to move quietly. He came from the north, he said. No horse, no bedroll. He was carrying nothing at all. He told her about moving the pan back onto the heat, about the salt pork, about the hardtack he broke in half and handed across without speaking. He said the man ate the way a man eats when he has been a long time without, steadily, without looking up, without waste. He sat with us for a while after, he said. Not long. He did not say anything that I recall except once. When the fire settled, he said it was a good fire. That was all. He left before first light. I woke and he was gone. The map was there where he had been sitting. He stopped. The room held the quiet the way a cold room holds it, completely, without echo. She had not moved since he started. Her hands were still on the table, one of them resting near the edge of the map without touching it. Her face was turned slightly away from him, toward the window where the gray light sat low and flat. She was not blinking much. When she spoke, her voice was level. "Was he afraid of you?" she said. Then, a beat later, "Or were you afraid of him?" He considered it. "No," he said. She looked at him then, directly, for the first time since he had started speaking. He did not elaborate. He had not been afraid. The man had come out of the dark and he had been cold and hungry and the fire was there. That was the sum of it. Some things did not require more accounting than that. She turned back to the map. Her finger moved to the bottom edge, where the single line of writing ran in cramped, careful letters. She did not read it aloud. She had already read it, and reading it again would not change what it said or what it meant. She just rested her fingertip at the edge of the words and stayed there. The candle had burned down a third of its length by the time either of them moved. She was still tracing the edge of the writing with one finger, not pressing, just resting there, the way you might rest a hand on the shoulder of someone sleeping. He watched her do it and did not speak. Outside, the October light had shifted from gray to something thinner and less certain. The creek was not visible from where he sat, but he knew it was there by the cold that came off the east wall this time of year, steady and patient, the way the valley announced its winters early. She smoothed the map flat with both hands. It was not a gesture of decision. It was not the way you flatten a document before signing it, not the way you smooth a sheet before folding it away. It was slower than that, and quieter. Her palms moved from the center outward, following the old creases without hurrying, as if she were learning the paper through her hands rather than her eyes. The folds had softened over 31 years until they were more like memories of folds, still there, still true, but gentle now with use and time, and whatever the wall had done to them over the winters, he had forgotten they were there. He watched her hands. He did not cover them. He did not reach across the table. He simply stayed in his chair, with both his own hands resting on his thighs, and he let her have the map, and the silence, and whatever was moving through her that had no name, and did not require one. The candle guttered once and steadied. Through the window the sky had gone from pale to something close to nothing, that last flat erasure of light that comes in October, before dark, arrives in full. The ridgeline was still visible, just barely, a dark, uneven line against a sky only slightly darker. Then it was not visible. Then the window held only the reflection of the candle flame and the dim shape of two people sitting at a table, and outside the valley was dark and still. She had not taken her hands from the map. He did not know what her father had looked like at 9 years old, or at 50, or in the years between. He did not know what had been between them, or what had been lost, or whether knowing any of it now made the distance smaller. He only knew what the man had looked like, coming out of the dark toward a fire, and what it had cost him nothing to do, and how 31 years could fold like paper into a single evening, at a table in a valley, neither of them had found alone. The candle burned low. They stayed.